Okay, so we're doing Mishnah 14, chapter 5, Pirkei, Mishnah Yud Daled, Mishnah 14. You know what's interesting about this Mishnah? I just realized, literally, as I was walking in, that this Mishnah was millennia ahead of its time, as we shall see. So remember that this chapter, Pirkei, has been the numbers chapter. So we learned about things that are in tens, we've learned about things that are in sevens. We're now at the section where we're learning things that are in fours. And today we're going to learn what is called Arba Midos Beholchei Lebeis HaMedrash, or Beholchei Beis HaMedrash, that there are four qualities or four characteristics of people who go to the Beis HaMedrash. In other words, people who go to a place of learning. Don't you think that's a great way to start a new semester? Right? 4 types of people who come to the shiur. That's basically what it is, right? 4 types of people. Okay, so please pay attention to the 4 kinds of people, because you should, I'm pretty sure, very easily find the glaring question about this Mishnah. Okay, so there are 4 kinds of people who go to learn. 4 kinds of people who go to the shiur. Number 1, hoylech ve'enoi oise. The person who goes to the Beis Medrash but doesn't do. Now I'm leaving that open-ended. Okay, do. In fact, that word oise is going to be one of the most intriguing parts of this Mishnah, and we're going to look at 5 potential ways to understand that word oise. So for now, we're going to keep it really generic and say the person who goes to the Beis Medrash, the person who goes to the shiur, but doesn't do anything. So what happens to such a person? We say, schar halicha biyadai. That person leaves with having achieved the reward for the effort of going to the yeshiva. Schar halicha. By the way, that's why some people, dafka, take a longer route to go. In other words, I could go learn at the yeshiva near to me, but I'll go learn at the yeshiva that's further from me, so I get schar halicha. The Gemara actually tells a story with shul. The Gemara tells a story with shul, exactly. The Gemara tells the story that there was this particular woman, I think she was a widow if I'm not mistaken, and she had a shul in her immediate neighborhood, but she made a point of going to a further shul to have schar halicha, to have every step becomes a mitzvah, every step becomes part of the process. So, the person who goes to the yeshiva but doesn't actually learn, at least they get schar halicha, they get the value of having gone, the value of having walked, of having traveled. Make sense? Okay, let's try the next one. Oise ve'enoi hoylech. Okay, the person who does but doesn't travel. Schar ma'aseh biyadai. Well, that person gets the reward of the action that they've done. They can't get the reward of having gone because they didn't go. Yeah? Make sense? Everybody happy with that? Okay, let's look at the next one. Hoylech ve'oise. A person who both goes to the Beis Medrash and does something productive once they're there, chassid. That's a chassid. Just let's remind ourselves, what's the definition of a chassid? Somebody who goes beyond the requirement of the law. Okay, hold that thought, we'll come back to it. The person who doesn't go, nor do they do, rasha. That person is a rasha. What's the glaring question in this Mishnah? Glaring question, come on.
It doesn't say where to.
Glaring, it does. It says Holchin lebeis hamedrash. It says at the beginning. It says that they're going to the Beis Medrash. What's the glaring question?
Why Russia?
Oh, good. Okay, that's not the glaring question, but it is a good question, and we are going to talk about it. Why a Russia? The person doesn't go to the yeshiva. Okay, but we call them a Russia. Like Russia, I'm sorry, it's not a very complimentary term. I don't know if at this time of the year we should be using that word. You know, you're supposed to be very careful about Avas Yisrael at this time of the year. So we shouldn't use the word. So why call them a Russia? Yes, valid question. I'm looking for the glaring question in this Mishnah. Well, what?
Actual. I don't know how to put it. Are they doing anything at the yeshiva, or are they just going?
Oh, okay. So that's the first person, right? Hoylech ve'enoi oise, who just goes, doesn't do anything. So then what's the point? What's the point? You go to the yeshiva. I mean, let's be honest. Anybody who's familiar with yeshivas, I don't know if it's the same in seminaries. I haven't spent any time in one. But I can tell you, anybody who's familiar with yeshivas will know this. There are people who just hang around. They float into the yeshiva and they hang around and they don't seem to do anything productive. They're not students, they're not enrolled in the yeshiva, they don't sit down and learn, they just hang around. So is that what we're talking about over here? Hoylech, a person who goes to the yeshiva, ve'enoi oisen, does absolutely nothing.
But then what are they doing?
Well, then what are they doing? I don't know, they're drinking the coffee because the coffee's free. I don't know.
It's like kids going to shul and playing soccer, but at least they're going to shul.
Okay, so maybe you can argue that with kids, at least you're creating an affinity by way of chinuch. You're educating a child that shul is a positive place. Whereas if an adult comes to the yeshiva and just sits around and doesn't do anything, what's the value in that?
But you can still be inspired by
Good. So he could still be inspired by being in that environment. Good. Okay. So how can we say he only gets the reward for going? Okay. Good. You're making a really good point. Hold that thought. What's the glaring question? Okay, maybe it's not so glaring. This Mishnah starts off by saying there are 4 characters who go to the yeshiva. 2 of them don't go. Right? The second person is oise ve'enoi hoylech. He does, but he does whatever he does. We haven't defined yet what doing is, but he doesn't go to the base medrash. How does he fall under the category of 4 people who go to the base medrash? He doesn't go. And the last one also doesn't go and doesn't even do anything. So how do they fall into the category of hoylech lebeis hamedrash, going into I mean, that's a weird thing, right? You start your introduction to this Mishnah by saying 4 kinds of people go to yeshiva. Oh, by the way, 2 of them don't go. How does that work? Doesn't seem to make sense. And by the way, if somebody goes to the yeshiva and they actually learn there, is that beyond the requirement of the law? Chassid. I mean, isn't that the norm? That's why you go to yeshiva, to learn. We don't say shkoyach, like there's this whole debate in education. Should we reward children for doing things that they're expected to do? You're a chassid, you came to the yeshiva and you learned. No, it's ridiculous, right? So why are we calling this person a chassid? Which is similar to the other question, why are we calling the other person a rasha? Okay, so
what are they actually doing here?
What are they doing, right? So that's why I said the word oise, we're going to have 5 possible ways to understand what oise means, because the word do is such a generic word. Do. Now the Gemara tells us something. Sorry, this is not a very comfortable statement that the Gemara makes, but this is what the Gemara says. Haloimed ve'enoi oise. If a person learns and all of the learning remains purely theoretical because they don't translate it into actions, noyach loi shenefcha shel yosoi. It would have been better that in utero the person would have been, so to speak, aborted, basically. So now, that's how bad it is for a person to learn without doing. How over here could we be talking about hoylech ve'enoi oise? Somebody who goes, in other words, goes to the yeshiva, ve'enoi oise, if we believe, and it's probably the simplest way to translate this, our first possible translation of the word oise means to do. So the person goes to the yeshiva and learns and then doesn't do what they learn. They don't belong in Pirkei Avos then. Because Pirkei Avos, remember, is addressed at Mili de Chasidusa, going beyond the requirement of the law. Well, this is somebody who is doing what the Gemara says far less than the requirement of the law. In fact, this person doesn't deserve to survive. So, can we translate the word oise over here in its normal translation, which is things that you do? In other words, is this a conversation about learning versus doing? Would you say that that's this conversation? Learning versus doing? Possibly. The only thing is that we've already discussed the possibility of different types of students. And here we're not talking about students. We're talking about people who are going to the base medrash. Why do you think that is? If we've already discussed various types of students, why are we now talking about different people who go to the base medrash? What's the difference between a student and a person who goes to the base medrash? Interesting question, right? So the various commentaries, that's why I say there are going to be 5 different ways to look at this. The various commentaries take different perspectives on what exactly the point of going to the Beis Medrash is. Now, even though we're going to see 5 different ways to translate the word oiseh, do, we're not necessarily going to say that there are 5 different reasons why you would go to the Beis Medrash, but it will kind of align almost exactly. Why does a person go to a Beis Medrash?
Would one not say though a student is going because he has to, he's expected to?
Good.
Someone else will be going.
Good, excellent. Good. So you'd say that a student is learning because there's an expectation that they'll learn. They've enrolled, they've paid the school fees or whatever it is. You expect them to learn. Whereas somebody here is going to the Beis Medrash, maybe they're going voluntarily. Okay, good point. And in fact, I believe it's the Yochin who says that Hoylech leBeis HaMedrash means this is not somebody who's going to learn in the classical sense. This is somebody who's going to hear words of Musar. That's why they're going to the Beis Medrash. In other words, there's going to be a speaker or a teacher or a Rosh Yeshiva or a mentor who's going to get up over there and teach us the things that you read between the lines. The philosophies of Judaism, personal development, ethical development, Musar concepts, as opposed to a Talmud, a student who could satisfy themselves by saying, well, I've learned the Gemara, and I've learned the Halacha, and I've learned the Chumash, and I've learned Tanakh. So that's one possible distinction over here, in which case the word oiseh does not translate as just doing mitzvahs, but rather oiseh would translate into working on themselves and changing themselves. Now that makes a lot more sense. We're not completely done with the possibility that oiseh means actually doing mitzvahs. We'll still come back to that. But the first possibility we're going to explore is that somebody goes along to learn about behavior modification and they don't do it. So hoylech, the person goes to the Beis Medrash and they hear all of these things that you're supposed to do. Careful how you speak, work on anger management, build your emunah, all those kinds of things. Curb temptations. And then they go home and they know oiseh. They don't do it. So now you've got to ask yourself the question, why don't they do it? What do you think is the most common reason why people do not apply the philosophical or moral principles that they learn? What's the greatest reason? Most common, because what? Because it's difficult. Not because the people are bad. If a person learns a halacha, and the halacha says, you may not flip a light switch on Shabbos, let's just say. If a person chooses still to flip the light switch on Shabbos, not because it's so difficult not to do that, it's because, whatever, I've decided it's not something that's relevant in my life. You know, it's like almost in a sense discrediting the value of the teaching. But if somebody goes to the Beis Medrash and they learn, you know what, when next time you feel like you want to share a juicy piece of gossip, don't. And then the next time a person has that juicy piece of gossip, they do. It's not because it's rebellion. It's not because I'm going to show Hashem, I don't care. It's because it's difficult to keep our mouths shut. So if the reason the person's going to the Beis Medrash is to learn philosophy, hashkafa, Musar, things that affect our lives, our beliefs, our behaviors, that challenge us about controlling temptation, about managing anger, about going out of our way for other people, the reason that Einoi Oiseh is because these are difficult things to do. Therefore, at least you should get the value, you should get the reward for the fact that you went and that you go, schar alicha, you keep going to try and learn how to do this. Now, come on, does that not speak to us? How often do we go, we learn things, we resonate with those things when we learn them, we think that they're very profound, and then we disappoint ourselves. So what do? Say, well, I tried. No, we go back for the next one. And we know that we're going to let ourselves down again, and we know that we're going to feel guilty. And we go again. Schar halicha b'yodoi. That's what the Mishnah is saying. Don't feel that you are a loser, a failure, that, these are difficult things. Let's be realistic. They're difficult to apply in our lives. And so therefore, even if einoi oise, even if you are not yet at the point where you've managed to integrate these teachings into real life experiences, there is still value and there's still a reward for going and going again and going again to learn these values and principles.
And there's reward for intention.
Correct.
And actually make it into who you are.
Correct. So that's the point. Everybody knows the second part. Everybody knows that we have a responsibility to translate the theory into practice. What we have to remind ourselves is that Hashem acknowledges and values our efforts, our investment, our work. That's really valuable. It's really important to know this. Now, using that formula, let's take it back to the first way we translated the word oise. What's oise? In its most practical, simplistic, generic translation, oise is to do. Literally, to do a mitzvah. Now, that kind of makes a little bit more sense, because it is possible that a person goes to the Beis Medrash, learns about a mitzvah as well, but then, so in the case of morality, musar, ethics, emunah, a person could say, look, I don't have the wherewithal yet. I don't have the resilience yet. But in the case of doing a mitzvah, it is also possible that a person learns about a mitzvah and then the opportunity to fulfill the mitzvah eludes them. Due to no circumstance, to no choice of their own. So this happens to us sometimes, right? Let's say, for example, use a weird example, but it will illustrate the point. What would happen if somebody learnt about the value of a minyan for the first time in their life in March 2020? The first time they ever learn about the value of a minyan. So they say, that's it. Starting tomorrow, I'm going to the minyan. What happens tomorrow? They shut all the minyanim for the next year, right? So hoylech, the person went to learn, they had the best intentions, ve'einoi oise, and they don't get the opportunity to do the mitzvah because of circumstances beyond their control. So at least schar halicha. At the very least, they get the value of the fact that they went to learn. They tried, they put in their effort. So this is also valuable for us, because it's important to know that if we do learn and if we make the effort to go find out and we're unable to do the mitzvah, here's another example. Let's say that you learn right now, for argument's sake, you learn, for whatever reason, right now you're learning the laws of karbonos. So today you learned about the concept of a karban shlomim, which could be a donation, right? You decide you're going to bring a donation to the Beis HaMikdash, you're going to donate a karban. You say, oh, I'd love to do that. Yeah, well, that's very well, except that it just currently isn't a Beis HaMikdash. So, you've got to work a little bit harder on getting Mashiach here. But currently, right now, you cannot bring a karban shlomim. So what does the Gemara say? Hashem will consider it as if you actually brought the karban. So you got the schar halicha is not just that you get the reward for having gone, but that reward kind of almost extends into as if you did it. Okay, that's not what our Mishnah here is saying. It doesn't say the word that it's ki'ilu asa, that it's as if you did it, but it's just something to keep in mind. Now, there's a bigger issue at play over here. Let's look at the word oise from another perspective. The other perspective is juggling priorities. Sometimes it's easy. The shir is on Monday at 9 o'clock. How hard is that? You just put it in your diary, and Monday 9 o'clock, here we are. Right? Easy. But what happens if one morning at 10 to 9 on Monday, suddenly somebody asks you, I have nobody else who could take me to my doctor's appointment. The only person you're my neighbor, you're my friend, you're my only friend in the world. Nobody else could take me to my doctor's appointment. Can you please take me to the doctor? Now you have a debate. Hoileich versus oise. Do I go to the shir or do I do the mitzvah? There's a bit of a conflict over here. And generally speaking, we say that if there's a mitzvah that nobody else can do, that overrides Torah learning. That's what we normally say, right? That's fine, and that's correct. But you can't claim the value and benefit of something you didn't actually do. So if you take this person to the doctor, you won't get the value of the Torah learning. And if you go to the shiur, you won't get the value of taking the person to the doctor. So there are 4 attitudes to how you respond to this. Attitude number 1 is hoylech ve'inoi oise. Person who says, I would love to help you, but my shiur is my shiur, and I don't miss it for anything in the world, except holidays. Right? So I'm sorry, I cannot take it. What do we say to the person? Schar halicha b'yadai. You're still going to get the value of having learned Torah. We can judge the person from here till whenever about whether it was the correct response or not. Fact is, you went to the shiur, you do get the value and the schar of going to the shiur. That's it. Somebody else turns around and says, no. You know what? My shiur is really important, but Judaism can't just be completely self-absorbed. So I'm going to put my shiur on hold and go help this person get to the doctor. Oiseh, they do the mitzvah, ve'inoi hoylech, but as a result, they don't go listen to the shiur. So we say, great, beautiful, wonderful, schar maaseh b'yadai. You're going to get the reward of what you did. We can't expect that you get the reward for the learning because you weren't there for the learning. So what does the chassid do? The chassid says, I'm going to do both. You want to lift to the doctor? Gesundheit. We have to leave 10 minutes earlier. Then I'm going to go quickly zip over to my shiur. As soon as the shiur is finished, I'm going to come back to pick you up. Now you understand why this person is considered a chassid, because it's actually not required. It's not required. Halacha says that if there's a mitzvah nobody else can do, that overrides Torah learning. That's the letter of the law. But here's somebody who's so passionate about their Judaism that they say, I don't want to be satisfied with the letter of the law. I want to push myself beyond the letter of the law, and therefore I'm going to make a plan, even though it's going to be really uncomfortable and difficult and pressurized, so that I can get the opportunity to do both. And the Rasha says, I'll tell the shiur that I've got to take someone to the doctor, and I'll tell the person who needs to go to the doctor that I have a shiur, and I'll sleep in. So loy hoylech veloy oiseh. So you understand that this is somebody, it's not just simply that they don't go. This is kind of in a sense a rejection of both opportunities. And therefore they call their Rasha. Okay? So that's all in the context of seeing the word oiseh as oiseh doing a mitzvah. But there's another possibility. The other possibility is that the word oiseh is actually the beginning of a phrase that we use, oiseh peiros. Have you ever heard that expression? Oiseh peiros. What do we mean when we say that something or someone is oiseh peiros? We mean it comes to fruition. It's productive. Okay? Hoylech ve'einoi oiseh. A person who goes to the yeshiva, they go to the shiur, ve'einoi oiseh, but it goes over their head, and therefore it doesn't come to anything pragmatic. It doesn't come to fruition. It's not productive. And that happens sometimes, right? I hope it doesn't happen in this one, but happens sometimes. You go to a shiur and I have no idea what that was about. Went completely over my head. So hoylech, the person went to learn, but ve'einoi oiseh, they did not have the benefit of it actually being oiseh peiros, translating into something that they could apply in their lives. So we say to that person, you get the schar halicha. You don't get 0 just because it was over your head. Or possibly, einoi oiseh could even mean that they didn't invest the time to review what they learned afterwards. And maybe that's why they couldn't hang on to it. Because they just let it go. In the shiur it was great, and then after the shiur it's over, thank you very much. So they didn't actually invest in making oiseh peiros. They didn't invest in making it productive. Still, schar halicha. They get the value of having gone to learn. Oiseh ve'einoi hoylech means some people are that good that they could learn on their own. They don't need the chabura. They don't need the connection with others. They don't need the teacher. They're self-sufficient, and therefore they don't go to the yeshiva. And still oise, their learning is still something that is productive. It bears fruit. It actually makes a difference in their lives. So we say you're a wonderful human being and you're growing and developing and everything is magnificent, but you only get schar maaseh. You can only get the reward, the value for what you personally grew or what you personally saw as productive. But schar halicha, the benefit of going to be part of the klal, part of the community, well, you didn't get that. That you don't get. Chassid, a chassid is somebody who is hoylech ve'oise. Now, previously we thought, well, what's the big deal about that? Obviously you go to the yeshiva. Obviously the goal of being in the yeshiva is to learn. You go to the shir. Why do you go to the shir? In order to learn. No. A chassid means hoylech ve'oise. They make sure that every time they go to learn, every single time it will translate into something that will bear fruit, something that will be meaningful and productive in their life. And if they don't find that, they won't leave until they've reviewed or learned or found something that's going to be productive in their lives. Rasha, you know why it's a Rasha? There's a pasuk that says, Ki dvar Hashem boza. The person who despises the word of Hashem. Okay, we don't want to hear this. I'm sorry, but much of what we're going to learn now is not comfortable for people living in the 21st century. Kidvar Hashem boza, the person who desecrates or disgraces Hashem's name. What is the qualification? What defines somebody who desecrates Hashem's name? Says the Gemara, Mi sheyesh biyodoi lasoik batoira ve'enoi oisek. Person who has the opportunity to learn Torah and they don't. That is what the pasuk means when it says Kidvar Hashem Baza, the word of Hashem they have disgraced. Think about it. It's really simple. Sorry, this is going to be a bit uncomfortable, like I say, living in the 21st century. You know, once upon a time, what did people do in their spare time? What do they do in their spare time? What's spare time? You know, first of all, they slept enough. That was one of the big differences between the old world and the modern world. People actually slept enough. And when they read the Rambam's 8 hours, they were like, that's easy. For us, we're like, 8 hours, if I could just get through all the things I have to scroll through on my phone, you know, then maybe I'll get a few more hours. So if a person's being productive, they're producing food, they're looking after their children, they're learning, davening. Okay, those are all, well, obviously learning. Those are all good reasons not to engage in Torah learning. But on the scale of things, just imagine the person who says, okay, Hashem, you want me to learn Torah. I know there's this principle, v'hagisa bo yomam v'layla, you're supposed to engage with Torah day and night. But I got this really important series of WhatsApp memes that I've got to get through. So Hashem, I'll get to you. Please hold. Please hold. So that's called Kidvar Hashem Baza. I mean, it's a heavy thought, but if you think about it, it's disrespect to Hashem. We're saying, I've actually got something that's more important right now than your Torah. So loy hoylech veloy oise, the person who doesn't want to go to the yeshiva, and even at home they don't want to learn. That's a rasha, because it shows this complete contempt for Hashem. So we could see the word oise literally as in doing mitzvahs. We could see the word oise as applying moral values in our lives. We could see the word oise as learning in a way that is productive. We could see the word oise as a description of what happens on the way to the yeshiva. Hoylech ve'enoi oise. A person who's going to learn, going to the shir. So all of us have different ways that we get around. Some people are close enough that you could walk to the shir. Some people have to drive to the shir. So what do we often do, most commonly? On our way from point A to point B, we say the destination is holy, the journey not necessarily. Hoylech ve'enoi oise. The person's going to the yeshiva, but doesn't make a point of oise using the time productively while they're on their way to the shir. Because really what's supposed to happen is, how are we supposed to learn Torah? That's what's supposed to happen. We're supposed to learn Torah while we're on the road as well. You know, in the Chabad tradition, it's actually interesting because it was the entry in today. There's a book called the Hayom Yom, which is a thought for each day of the year. So it was today's entry. So in the Chabad tradition, each of the Chabad Rebbes would have a particular discourse that he repeated on a regular basis, so people would know it by heart, so that they would have things they could review when they walked in the streets, because the expression that was used is, that purifies the air. So not only do we occupy ourselves in learning Torah, we actually purify our environment when we review Torah while we're out and about. Now, once upon a time, people used to remember phone numbers. Do you remember such a thing? Right? So remember phone numbers. Like dozens of phone numbers. So in those days, we were more inclined to learn things by heart. Today, you'd be lucky if you know your spouse's phone number. So 1 second, I'll check on my phone. I'll send it to you. Right? But also in today's world, you can podcast just about everything Jewish. So there's really no reason for us not to be occupied in Torah learning even when we're out and about, when we're on the go. Because there are 1,000,001 possibilities. There's the libraries. They say that there are more shiurim online than you'll ever have the time for in your whole life. And we're all saying, I don't know what to learn. Right? There's such a fortune, there's such a glut of content. So says the person says, when I get to the yeshiva, that's when I'm going to learn. But along the way, I'm not doing anything to fill my head on the way. So that person gets, what do you get? You get the value of once you're there. Is the person who says, I've got plenty of content. I don't have to go anywhere. I've got enough content. I've got books on my shelf. I've got an internet at home. I don't have to go anywhere. So we say, great, you're filling your mind, but you're still lacking that experience of going to the base medrash. Again, the modern world, and particularly post-COVID, we all learned that I don't have to go to a shiur. The shiur can come to me. I can, curate a whole lot of content that at my own pace. And the best part, the very best, I don't know about you, the very best part about listening to online shiurim is you can put it on double speed. It's the best part. Try that in a shiur. Like, okay, next point. But at least there you can double it up, you can cover ground, it's unbelievable. So we shouldn't lose sight and value of halicha, of going to learn in a group, because there's a way that we learn when we're together that is far superior to the way that we learn when we're alone. Chassid is hoylech ve'oiseh. The chassid says it's not just about the destination. The chassid knows that you've got to fill every moment of the experience with learning, so that even while you're going to learn, you're already learning. And the Rasha says, as we well know, I don't care for any of this. So not on the way, not at the yeshiva, not at home, checked out, not interested in learning. And then there's another way that we could translate the word oiseh. When it comes to tzedakah, the halacha says as follows: Gadol hame'aseh yoiser min ha'oiseh. That if you get somebody else to give tzedakah, it's even a greater achievement than giving tzedakah on your own. Similar to the Mishnah we learned already, right? The person who says that I want to give all the tzedakah, that wasn't good enough. You need to be somebody who gives and encourages others to give as well. And so, Judaism is not designed for individuals to live in a vacuum. If you think about it, just think about the Jewish experience. While there are many Jewish things that we can do alone at home, you cannot have the whole Jewish experience alone. So you need a minyan, and you need to be able to give shalach manos to somebody, and you need to have people at your Seder table. Everything is designed in such a way that it creates engagement with each other. Even the way that we learn Torah, we are not the classical students in a library. Now you go, you find your little corner, put in your headphones, white noise, and read your book. That's not how Jews learn. How do we learn? We're dynamic, we're interactive, everybody has an opinion, there's questions, there's counter questions. In a yeshiva, you see the chavrusas sitting. Most people who've never been in a yeshiva don't understand how it is possible to concentrate, because you're sitting 3 centimeters away from another pair of people who's screaming at each other while you're screaming at each other. Because the whole Jewish experience is interactive. Kol Yisrael Arevim Zeh Bazeh, we are completely interreliant, we're completely interconnected. And so therefore, Hoylech ve'einoi oiseh. If a person only goes to the shir and einoi oiseh doesn't make anyone else go to the shir, doesn't bring anybody else along with them, of course, you'll get great value for the fact that you went and you attended, but it's only 50% of the goal. And then, of course, you get the person who is oiseh ve'einoi hoylech, which means that they push everybody else to go to the shir. But next week, maybe. This week, I've got something on, right? So the person is always encouraging everybody else to go to the shir, but doesn't necessarily do so themselves. So schar ma'aseh, you get the value of getting others to learn, but if you're not engaged with those others, what's the value? The chassid knows that. There's no value to my going along to the shir. If I know of other people that I'm not encouraging to go to the shir, then there's no value to me being there. And there's no value to me learning on my own if I'm not learning with other people. So he gets that. And then the Rasha says, if anything, I'm going to learn on my own. I'm not hoylech, I'm not going to the Beis Medrash. And I'm not oiseh, I'm not getting other people to go to the Beis Medrash. I'll live in my little cocoon, I'll do my own thing, I'll appear to be quite frum in my own estimation, says the Mishnah. Actually, that's a Rasha. Not a Rasha halachically, but this is Mili de Chasidusa. We're looking at how you live beyond the requirement of the law, and from that perspective, this is what's considered a Rasha. And on that note, that we could be talking over here about a Rasha who is a Rasha in context, not a Rasha in the full horrible sense of the word. Rasha means you're not living beyond the requirements of the law. So here's a fascinating perspective. You ready for this? A fascinating perspective. Right at the beginning, we said that the possibility of hoylech ve'einoi oiseh could mean that a person goes and learns, but does not translate their learning into action. Now, if somebody does not translate their learning into action, they are not the subject of Pirkei Avos. Because as we said, the Gemara tells us, if a person learns and they keep it purely theoretical and they don't want to translate it into action, then it's rather best that they shouldn't have been born in the first place, right? So they don't belong in Pirkei Avos. Pirkei Avos is directed at people who are already doing the right thing by the letter of the law, and now we're talking about going beyond the letter of the law. They can't be the subject of our Mishnah. So how could you have somebody who learns and yet does not actually perform what they're learning and still they're the subject of Pirkei Avos? Must be what? Must be that it's what we call oines. That the only reason they didn't translate their learning into action was because of circumstances beyond their control. Now, of course, there are circumstances beyond our control that we can't do anything about. Like the example I gave you, bringing a korban. There's nothing you can do. Can't bring a korban. No, sorry. Can't go into your backyard, put up a pile of stones and take a goat. Right? We can't do that. But there are circumstances that are within our control. Maybe next time. So let's say, for argument's sake, a person, let's just say, missed the opportunity to daven one day. Somebody recently asked me, is it true that if you miss lighting Shabbos candles one Friday, that you're supposed to add another candle going forward? Yes, true? Yes, it's true, right? So I said, not only is it true, but I think most people have at least one extra candle. Why? Because Hashem in His great infinite wisdom tends to throw weird scenarios at us on Fridays. So there's the person who had their baby on Erev Shabbos. Didn't get to, the person who had chas v'shalom a medical emergency. Whatever, things happen, right? So if something happens that is completely beyond our control, and we don't do a mitzvah because of circumstances beyond our control, are we liable? Are we liable for that? Or let's put it into different words, harsher words. If a person has the chance to do a mitzvah and chooses not to do it, we could say that person is a rasha. At least in context, because that's a rebellion against Hashem. So if a person doesn't do a mitzvah because of circumstances outside of their control, do we call them a rasha?
No.
Depends who you're talking to. If you're talking to people in the context of black and white law, no, definitely not a rasha. It's oines, the Gemara tells us, oines rachmono patre. If a person is in circumstances they can't control, Hashem excuses them from that mitzvah. But the Gemara says, Ke man da'ovid lo amrinon. We're not going to consider it as if you did the mitzvah. So does the person need to do teshuvah?
Yes.
Definitely. Definitely.
You're going to do teshuvah because you have a baby here in Shabbos.
So, well, you're not doing teshuvah for having the baby. You're doing teshuvah for missing the mitzvah. Right? Because, let's be clear, teshuvah is not only fixing damage. Teshuvah is also restoring loss. So yes, of course, if a person goes against Hashem, the kind of teshuvah that they have to do is repair the damage of what I did. But if a person missed an opportunity to do something positive, doesn't matter why they missed it, they should have an opportunity for teshuvah to regain what they lost. That's what should happen.
But is it an obligation to do all mitzvahs, Asa? Not necessarily.
Fine. So we're talking here about a mitzvah you are obligated to do, and then a situation arose that didn't allow you to do that mitzvah.
The korban mitzvah also, that's what
We're going to talk about the korban, exactly. Great example. And I'll give you another example that's particularly relevant now because we're in the 3 weeks. There's a mitzvah, so I say, a positive mitzvah in the Torah to build the Beis HaMikdash. Nu? Why aren't you doing this mitzvah? It's a positive mitzvah to build the Beis HaMikdash. Exactly. Says the Rambam in his introduction to Mishnayos Midos, which is the section of the Mishnah that talks about the dimensions of the Beis HaMikdash. The Rambam says, why do we have such a tractate? Because by learning about the details of the design and layout and dimensions of the Beis HaMikdash, we fulfill this mitzvah. How do you like that? It's no longer oines, we actually have a method that we could use. Likewise, the Gemara says, Kol ha'oisek b'toras chatos ke'ilu hikriv chatos. If you learn the laws of the chatos offering, then you have fulfilled your obligation of bringing a chatos. Which means, if a person did something wrong for which they have to bring a korban chatas, that's how you fulfill the obligation. When Mashiach comes, you'll fulfill it even better by actually bringing the chatas. But right now that you can't do that, in exactly the same way as when a person converts to Judaism, the requirements to convert to Judaism are that if it's a boy, male, they have a bris, then everybody, male or female, has to immerse in a mikveh, and they have to bring a korban. If without that, you can't convert. So how do people convert today? Because when Mashiach comes, you'll fill in the gaps. In the meantime, you do what you can. So in the meantime, you can't physically build the Beis HaMikdash, so you learn about it. You can't physically bring the korban, so you learn about it. But we're talking about a different example over here. You had the opportunity to do the mitzvah, lighting Shabbos candles, whether you want to say that's technically a mitzvah. Person misses the Shema one morning. You can't say the Shema twice tomorrow. It's not going to help. That's why the Gemara calls it it's something that you've lost and you can never retrieve. So do you have to do tshuva for something like that? Yes, you do. That's why in this Mishnah we refer to loy hoylech v'loy oise, the person who doesn't do anything at all. We actually use the word rasha not to accuse the person or to degrade the person, but to tell the person, be aware of the fact that there's room for teshuva for this behavior.
Is there also someone who claims ignorance? Like they say, I don't know this was the law.
Okay, so let's be clear. Claiming ignorance is not the same as oines. Claiming ignorance in any legal system, ignorance of the law is never an excuse, to protect a person against the law. Whereas if a person knows the law and wants to do it, this is an oines we're talking about, and they cannot do it because of circumstances outside of their control. The person was sick that day. They literally couldn't lift their head, so they didn't get to say Shema. We don't just say, let bygones be bygones. We say there is scope and room for teshuva over here. There's scope and room for teshuva, and the teshuva is not to say, I'm sorry for rebelling. The teshuva is to say, I'm going to find something in my life that will help to compensate for the loss. So let's say, for example, the person who missed saying the Shema in the morning, you can never make that up, but you can encourage somebody else who doesn't normally say the Shema and get that person to say the Shema. That would be a form of teshuva, because you're now bringing a Shema into the world that wasn't going to be there to compensate for the one that you lost.
I don't know, because the uvas may not you did something, the uvas means something wrong. You created something bad. You're not necessarily creating something bad.
So the example that's used in the Gemara for mu'uva shelo yachal litikun is person who doesn't say Shema. There's another example which is much more horrific, which we're not going to mention right now. But the first example the Gemara uses is the person doesn't say Shema. That's the example.
What are you creating that's bad? What are you doing that's...
So me'uvas means a corruption, right? And not a creation. So every single time that we do a mitzvah saseh, we bring a certain dimension of godliness into the world. Not doing a positive mitzvah means that we have now, so to speak, deprived the world of a certain dimension of godliness, and it can't be repaired because yesterday was yesterday and I can't do it double today. So that's why it's called me'uvas, like it's a corruption of the system, and there's no way, letikun, there's no way to correct it.
But that's not perfection. You'll be spending your life doing teshuvah.
Yes, you should spend your life doing teshuvah. Absolutely, you're 100% right. How did David HaMelech say? V'chatosi negdi samid. That's what he said. My lack, because remember the word chait doesn't only mean an avera, it also means lack. So my lack, the areas of my life that need to be repaired, in other words, where I need to do tshuva, is in front of me, tamid, always. And I think when David HaMelech said tamid, I don't think he meant only on Sundays. Right? Tamid means all the time. So yes, we are supposed to engage in a form of tshuva all our lives, 100%. Yes, it might sound overwhelming. We don't mean tshuva as in like beating our chests all day long, but tshuva in a constant state of trying to elevate things that haven't been as good as they should have been. That's definitely what we're supposed to do. One last point. So the person who didn't go to the Beis Medrash, what do we tell him? You get the reward for what you did, whether that's the learning or the application, etc., not the reward for going, and reverse. The person who went and didn't do gets the reward for going. So let's say that person does teshuvah afterwards, whatever that teshuvah looks like. So on Monday, this person went to the shiur but didn't listen to a word. On Tuesday, they do teshuvah for that, whatever the teshuvah looks like. Do they now get the reward that they missed? So assuming that their teshuvah is 100% proper and accepted, does that now fill in the reward of what they missed?
Maybe part of their teshuvah is to actually find out what they missed and learn.
Oh, good point. So go find out remember that's part of the oisavei nohoilech. The person says, I'll stay home, send me the recording. So I'll catch it up. But you're right, definitely part of the teshuvah will be to make up what they missed. So there's a fascinating debate, and there's no clarity on whose view we go with, but there's a fascinating debate. The Shalah brings this debate. Is the reward for a mitzvah that you do a mitzvah, and then as a response to you, Hashem gives you a reward? Or is the reward for a mitzvah that you do a mitzvah, and the natural consequence of a mitzvah is the reward? If you go with the first opinion, you do a mitzvah, and then Hashem chooses to give you a reward, then if a person does teshuvah, Hashem can now choose to fill in the reward even for something that you practically didn't do at the time. Whereas if we go with the other philosophical view, which is the nature of reward for mitzvahs is a direct, natural consequence, well, in that case, if at the time I didn't generate that consequence, there's no way to go back in time and to generate it. So the jury is a little bit out on that one, exactly which philosophy. It's subject for a lot of discussion and debate, but it's just intriguing to know that there is even the possibility that when a person does teshuvah for something, not only do they wipe the slate, not only do they fix the lack, but that there is the possibility of even getting the reward for something they didn't actually do. Fascinating, right? And we'll leave on that note.